part of why TPM is such an important part of our, our workforce and education system. So I know that some of you have already been through the TPM process. This is actually part of strategy 2. So if you don't know what strategy 0 and 1 are, I'm just going to give you like sort of a framework. So we're coming into this meeting, and the assumptions are that you've already done your legwork in terms of, talking to all of the stakeholders, which is really strategy 0, and getting people prepared for the work that you're about to do. You probably already have buy-in from your businesses in an industry. So they've decided that, yes, they want to work together to talk about their most critical jobs in their industry and figure out how we can raise the awareness for those jobs with the education communities and the people who are going to go into them. So you've already done strategy 0 and 1, right? So now we're going to be working on strategy 2. And this is what I would do in my second meeting. So in my first meeting, and I'm just going to frame this by saying, this is only one way to do it. A lot of people have their own way to do it. So what I'd like to do is spend about 15, 20 minutes describing how I've done it, and then potentially hear from some of you guys as to if you've done it a different way, or if you have some recommendations or other strategies that you think work well. So I have a few slides that I'm going to share, but I just want to mention who's in the room right now. So we've invited a group of businesses to come together. They have a shared hiring need, and I'll use an example here. I'm going to use nursing because nursing is a need practically everywhere in the country. So these are a bunch of hospital people. Now, in my case, I'm working with chief nursing officers, but the hiring managers are the ones that you want to have in the room. Now, that might include more than one person. They might have maybe the chief nursing officer with an HR person, or somebody who does organizational development, or some combination. But what we want to have there are the people who know the job really well, who can help us define what those jobs are. So we've invited them to come to our meeting, and we've planned about an hour and a half. And in that hour and a half, we're going to do activities where people are super engaged. And when they leave here, they actually want to work together. So I know that sounds like a lot, because the first time you've met, what you're seeing in the room is a whole bunch of businesses who are saying, I take your person, you take my person. I don't know if I want to share any information with you. You've just basically built their trust as you are a neutral convener. So now we're here and we're saying, you're going to work with all these peers that you have out there, and you're going to share some of your information. You don't have to give anything confidential in this discussion, but when we're finished with it, we're going to be ready to conduct a needs assessment, and you're developing that here today. So I'm going to share a screen. Yeah, let's see if I can do that. Oh, is there anyone who can provide me with the ability to share a screen? Ashley?
You should already be a co-host, but it sounds like you're not. So try again.
Okay.
I think Laura has to do it.
Is Laura in the room?
I'll just share the screen for you. How about that?
Oh, yeah, that sounds great. Okay. That makes it easy for me.
In one moment. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Others? Okay. So I call it a hiring demand workshop. And typically when we come into this, I'll just say in our healthcare hiring demand workshop, we had about 70 people. So every hospital was participating. a number of visiting nurse organizations. We have about 10 in our state. And then we had a handful of residential care facilities. So, you know, we had this group of people. Some of them had 3 or 4 people with them. Others had just 1, but that's who was in our room. Can you go to the next slide? So our agenda is this. It's pretty simple. We are going to do 5 things today. We're going to talk about who your most valuable employees are. We're going to talk about critical jobs to your organization. We're going to try to build some consensus between your organizations, define the requirements for those jobs, and then talk about how we can use that in a needs assessment. So remember, this is an hour and a half. Okay, so first thing I do is I go back to our original, we're working on a process. It's called talent pipeline management. It's a set of strategies and research tools that aligns training with industry careers. So my really not so neat handwriting, I've circled the fact that we are on strategy 2, that we're going to project critical job demand. And in order to get there, we are going to just work together on it today. So I've used this terminology a lot, but the most important thing about this work is that it represents authentic employer demand. There's another session going on right now about how to use labor market information. We always start with labor market information as a place that says, we have this data set, but what we're trying to figure out is, what does it really mean? So we're using industry best practices, we're planning for future jobs and careers, and we're producing collective action and decision-making by doing this work. I always talk about the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation also. This is not unique to us here in Vermont. It's something that's going on nationally. And we're constantly working on continuous improvement. So the first thing I do is, it's really an icebreaker. It's the first activity is you're going to pair with another employer. And I always ask people, if you've come as a pair or group of people, to pair with somebody who's not in your organization to describe your most valued employee. And then we take like maybe 7 minutes to do this. They interview each other. What happens in this activity is really just that. It's an icebreaker, but it's a place of coming together with, these are our common interests. So the questions that you ask each other, what's the person's job who's the most valuable employee in your organization? What qualities make that person stand out? And what kind of education or credential does he or she have to have? So typically what you're hearing is somebody who has some really outstanding employment skills paired with some really specialized industry skill. So, and typically, I'll just say in construction, we had 12 employers get together in our very first pilot, and they all described exactly the same role using exactly the same terminology. Our most valued employee is the site superintendent. So that, you know, if you go to the next slide, we do a report out. You don't have to talk about yourself. What you want to do is you want to share out what your partner described and how different or similar that person's answers were to yours. So really what we're doing here is building like a common starting place so that everyone can see that even though we work for different companies, we're in the same industry and we have some pretty similar needs. Next slide. That whole thing takes about 15 minutes. So, you know, you've already gone around and introduced yourself at the very beginning, but that's the activity to get people on the common page. And I believe that you can do that pretty quickly. So then we talk about critical jobs. What are critical jobs? These are the things that keep your organization operational. It could be the most important job or one that many people do. So in the case of construction, we talk about the most important job, the site superintendent, but the one that most people do is carpenter. Those are two critical jobs in construction. In healthcare, pretty much everyone says the single most important job in their organization is RN or physician. those are the two things that like nobody can operate without, because other people can change the beds, other people can care for individuals in different ways and bring them food, but without those two things, you can't really operate. So, we talk about meeting obligations of time, budget, quality. If you have to do without this role for a week, you can no longer meet your commitments. So that, just framing what a critical job is. Next slide. So our second activity is we give everyone a set of cards, and we ask people to work with the other people who they came with in their organization. You only get one set of cards for your organization. And this is what I would call rapid prototyping. So what we're asking people to do is on each card, write what the most critical job is in your organization, and you get 5 of them. So in the case of healthcare, you might say, we need certified medical assistants or certified nurse assistants, certified licensed nurse assistants. We need registered nurses. We need rehabilitation therapy. We need environmental services, and we need food services. So those are all things that people might write on their cards. Well, then this is just an activity that gets people out of their seats and actually involved in the decision making. They take their cards and they sort them by category. Okay, we call it food service, you call it nutritional service, but it means the same thing. We call it CNA, you call it LNA, but it means the same thing. And they sort those cards and we figure out how many of each of those things, people are saying that they need. And these are organizations across our state. So our number is relatively high of the people who are participating in this. Like I said, the first time we did it, we had about 70 people in the room. I don't have to know these things. I don't have to be the expert on it. It's really authentic that the employers are coming up with. We think the most important role here is the RN. We have 70 out of 70, employers are saying RN is important to them. 65 are saying the LNA is important, and we figure out, and we always call it, what are the top 5 for the industry? So this is where we're building consensus. This is the, consensus building. Most people said this, some people said this. Are there any outliers that didn't make it in numbers, but we really need to be considering? And I'm just going to say for Vermont, we've always taken the top 5 jobs within the industry. I know that there are other TPM providers out there that are just focusing on the top 1. And, if you're new to the industry, if you're new to TPM, top 1 is really important. I mean, or 1 or 2, if you're going to say we could make a real dent if we just did this one thing, that might be enough. We try to take the top 5 because we have kind of a small ecosystem in Vermont. I always try to give you the perspective of Vermont as a state is like the size of Richmond, Virginia, or Indianapolis, So we don't have that many people here. So that's why I feel like we can have an influence over that. Should we go to the next slide? So then we talk about it. What are the top critical roles? And we try to get consensus on what those top 5 are. And it could be top, you name it. It could be 1, could be 10, whatever you guys decide. And this is where it becomes authentically employer-led. And we ask, what's a common job title? What do we want to call this so everyone will recognize it? And that's where we start identifying those job descriptions that really, we all agree that these are the job descriptions for that type of job. And we're simply building consensus on it. Next slide. So then we have however many we plan to do. And I ask people to pair up into small groups. It's not pair, it's really like work in small groups. So if I have my top 5 roles include RN, LNA, LPN, I'm just going to use a whole bunch of nursing terms, and nurse practitioner. We ask people to go into groups and identify some of these things. And if you've ever done a demand planning survey or a needs assessment survey, you'll recognize these as the headings. So what are the competencies that someone needs to have to do this? And competencies are the things that they do on the job. What are the industry credentials that you recognize? So in some cases, a credential like LNA is enough, and you don't need college education. What's the education level? Might high school be enough for that? And then what are the soft skills? And the soft skills we describe as the qualities that a person is. So could be detail-oriented, empathetic, things like that. Those are the soft skills that we're looking for. And so they put together this. And what we're essentially doing is developing the needs assessment that they are going to answer themselves. So I'm collecting all this information from the role that they're defining in their small groups. Next slide. And then they're reporting out. These are the qualities that we think each of these categories for each of these roles are. And when they report out, there's an opportunity for people from the other groups to add to that. We also value these things. We ask them to do these things. And so we can still collect information from people from the other groups. And we're constantly, making adjustments to that. I even take the information that they've given me and I cross-reference it in a number of other sources like ONET, which is part of the Bureau of Labor Statistics and I'm going to say Department of Labor website that gives you some information and backgrounds on these types of things. So in the end, what I have is sort of a needs assessment prototype, and I give that back to the employers. This is after the meeting, and ask them, does this adequately represent what you want to know? So not only are we getting buy-in on these are the most critical jobs and these are the things that we want to know, is this everything that you need to know so that we can communicate it adequately to the job seekers, the policymakers, the educators, and we give them the opportunity to ask additional questions as well. Things like, is DEI, part of your corporate mission? Is drug testing a requirement for hiring? Things like that. So if we go to the last slide, I think this is the last slide. Yeah, we're talking about the hiring needs assessment. So I'm setting them up right now for the questions on the left here. Who's going to respond to this survey in your organization? Is it you? When do you want to do this? I'm going to, give you this information back. You're going to approve it. What's the timeline to launch this needs assessment? What period do you feel like you can forecast for? And I usually typically ask, do you think 2 years is adequate? Because we like to look ahead, but how far ahead can you really see? And then other assumptions, and I always give basic assumptions like a new hire is somebody who is hired because you have growth within your industry, where a replacement hire is because you have attrition, retirements, or even movement within your organization like advancement. So we just ask all these types of questions and get them to decide, when do they want to answer it? How long do they want it to stay open? And then they're tied to it. It becomes their survey. They've created it. You don't have to go after them and hammer them to do it, because they've actually bought into the development of it and into these answers. So, and I try to make it simple for them. The questions on the survey are, how many are you going to hire? Are they new or replacement? What are the talent needs? And it's a scale of not important to very important. And what other questions do you want to ask? So they're aware of what's coming. The next steps after this are, how do we forecast? And I usually do a 15-minute session right before we open the survey. And I record it, and I send it to everybody who's going to participate in it, so they know how to forecast. And then we release the survey. So in essence, what we've done is we've prepared them for data collection in this workshop. And that's an hour and a half. But this is probably this is the secret sauce that I think TPM is the most valued for, is being able to come up with data on employment needs. So I'm going to just say, let's stop sharing. And I'd love to hear from you guys. Does anybody have comments or other ways that they do this?
We have about 5 minutes for 3 minutes.
Okay.
So go ahead.
I know, I don't know if Gary's online with us today, but I'm extremely excited to have this tool. We've had the South Valley Industrial Collaborative that started a few years back. We got a little slowed down by the pandemic, but our ultimate goal is to support industry and to help industry grow here. And being able to have the tools that are available through the program will be of great benefit to us and our organization.
I'm glad. Thanks, Lisa.
And this is Kristen from Alabama. Hi there. I appreciated this entire overview. I really love anything we can do to prepare our employers. And I think the hour and a half session you discussed is really innovative. I had a question about, though, like really defining those competencies, because I remember going through the TPM course and getting the survey together. And in your hour and a half, like I followed the different conversations that you had, and you had that last like chunk conversation around competencies and skill sets and things like that. Are you capturing that information to then input that into the tool before you send it out? And how are you doing that? Is it someone who is a note taker, or like how are you actually getting that information? Because that's a lot of information to get in a short period of time.
It definitely is. Yeah. So because I work on this statewide, I actually have a bunch of regional development corporations that I work with. And the role of, the neutral convener really is note taker and, collector of information. So I have a facilitator in each small group who's collecting the information, taking the notes, writing it out. These are usually people who are TPM trained so that they can just collect it for me. If you're doing one at a time, you could be collecting it yourself. One thing that really I actually have going on in the background while this session is going on, if I have another person there who's TPM trained, I can have them actually inputting the name of the person into the survey tool so that they're setting them up online with their account, their survey tool account, while we're in the room, as opposed to the multiple steps of sending it to them, waiting for them to accept the setup for the survey tool, and then sending them the survey. It just saves that one step and streamlines it a little bit.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Richard?
Quick. I like the last slide. How many, Rich Succumbia from Montgomery County, how many will you hire, new or replacement hires? How accurate are your responses do you get? And then when you go through and do the data collection at the end, did they actually hire those folks?
Yeah,
That's
so the supply side is always the challenge, right? Collecting that information afterwards. Especially during the pandemic, not a lot of people were able to respond to the supply side information, but the tool allows you to. So we've only done it once with construction industry, which was a